Annie, I want the next dance. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Everybody loves to travel, right? Or so we think. No. Nothing's of universal appeal. What can I say? By nature, I never like to be away from home very long. I don't know. I'm not agoraphobic or anything. I don't think I even have standard travel fears, which is hodophobia, I later learned, or travel anxiety, which apparently is different. I don't fully have a grasp of it. I have some symptoms of each, but I just don't like to be away from home very long. And I noticed that like when I was in high school, a group of my friends and I wanted to go to New York. I'll have these New York fantasies. I wanted to go to Central Park and Washington Square, and I'll see the Statue of Liberty and all. But then we're talking, and they're talking about how they want to go for like 3 weeks. I want to go for like 2 days. But fortunately, we compromised. One friend felt the same way, and he and I went on our trip. They went on theirs. But what's really ironic about me saying this, you would have thought otherwise when I was in about second grade. I had the oddest fascination with, believe it or not, geography. I loved to read maps when I was a kid. I was obsessed over maps, land maps, road maps, how things were connected, how to get from one place to another. I learned to memorize the 50 states. I could still say them all in less than a minute. Don't worry, I'll spare you. And But still, it was good enough to just read about it and hear about it. And one of the things that fascinated me the most was the Mississippi River. It's like a friend to everyone in the country. It's just right there, prominent in the middle. It's there to say hi to you when you cross the country, and it looks so beautiful on the map. And I just think it was an amazing natural phenomenon. And another way I found out about how everybody loves to travel except me. I was in a karaoke contest once, early 90s. I was a finalist, and the prize was like a week cruise. And I told everyone, I said, when I became a finalist, I said, if I win this contest, I'm going to auction this off for a donation to the Pediatric AIDS Foundation. And everybody thought I was kidding. But I didn't win, so they didn't find out. But you mark my word, I would have done it. I did not want to be away from. I don't like to be away from home. I just do. But my parents took me on some trips when I was a kid for lengthy periods, and it was actually very traumatic. I like to kind of have fun remembering it nowadays, but there was some rough moments. It caused me to withdraw from life in school and everything. Very ugly results. I used to blame my parents for it, but these days I've learned to forgive them because they took for granted, like we all do. Everybody loves to travel. The only reasons I travel nowadays, when my mother's been gone about 7 years now. I used to go home for Passover to Ohio every year. I would go, and other things to see like my class reunion. I'd go every time, and visit people, to visit friends and family. And there was a time I also was a groupie for some musicians, and I would go to see some bands. I would go out on the road with them, and that was a very fun thing. But they were my destination. It was never. I was rarely, aside from that New York trip, and then went to Toronto later on. It was rarely that there was a destination that intrigued me so much that I wanted to go to it, because I just wanted to stay home and just read about it. It was good enough for me. And like these days I go to, my best friend lives in Houston. And I'll go to see her, spend the afternoon with her, have lunch with her, but I'm always back by supper. But for me, that feels like it's traveling. It's getting away at least for a day. But when I was 13 years old, I was in my father's office one day, waiting to go home with him, and just a little bored and looking for the nearest thing I can find. By then, my fascination with geography as a second grader had been replaced by my fascination with movies and with song standards, which still consumes me to this day. But for old time's sake, I grabbed the nearest thing I could find that could pass time with, and that was a Rand McNally atlas. And somehow I got on this kick of looking at my old friend, the Mississippi River, and following it up to where it begins, because I never really considered that. Where does the Mississippi River begin? Beginnings are fascinating to me. I love seeing movies debuts. I love seeing movies where a favorite song was written for it, like I'm watching that song introduced for the first time. So how about applying that to the Mississippi River? So I trace it up on a map. It goes up through Minnesota. The line gets smaller and smaller. It even disappears for a little while, but I know it's still there, just proportionally too thin to show on the map. But then eventually I find it. It says Lake Itasca, source of the Mississippi River. I'm, again, 13 years old. I go, wow, that is fascinating. That has got to be one of the most amazing things, to see the lake, to see the spot where the Mississippi, where there's no Mississippi River here, and suddenly there's none here, and then there's one here, it begins here, and I fantasized that it was just like a tiny little stream flowing out of this lake, and I'm like, it couldn't be that amazing, could it? And it was like the second grader within me was already like kind of getting a retro thrill, even though as a 13-year-old, I don't understand exactly why, but I could still feel it, and I was like, wouldn't mind, seeing it for myself one day. Not long after that, we were in our English class, we were studying mythology. And the assignment toward the end was to write a modern-day myth, a story of how something came to be. And it's something in modern day. Naturally, I thought of the Mississippi River. I went up to my teacher. I guess I shouldn't say his name, I don't know from his. I'll call him Mr. P. That was his name, be with a P. So I go up to Mr. P. I say to him, do you know what Lake Itasca is? And he goes, oh yes, that's in Minnesota, and it's the source of the Mississippi River. And I thought that was cool. So I didn't know. I thought it was something. I felt a little embarrassed because I had just found that out for the first time. And apparently Mr. P knowing it shows it's common sense. But then I started mentioning it to other people, and nobody knew what it was. So I don't know if you go to this day, I'm not sure, you go to your common folk and say, do you know what Lake Itasca is? Well, they know it's the source of the Mississippi. Well, now you all know. Okay, but anyways, so my essay was about, I remember it was about a boy, a family, a boy and his parents. They get separated. The mother winds up in what is now New Orleans, then the boy and the boy and his father wind up in Minnesota. And they're longing to find the mother. They don't know where she is. And the boy starts to fantasize that if he digs a little river out of this lake, maybe it'll take him to her. And then his father gets killed in an accident. The boy's all by himself. And he goes to bed one night, and the gods create a river for him to go to take down. I wish I would have saved that essay. It's long gone. But nonetheless, Mr. P loved the story, and that too was inspiring me. And so I'm like thinking, someday, okay, let's cut ahead to 2007. The movie The Bucket List comes out. I'm sure many of you saw it, the Rob Reiner directed film. I didn't think it was very good, actually, but I saw it. But the thing is, that movie had really drastic impact on my life because I had never heard that. If I had heard that expression, bucket list, before, I didn't remember it, but it stood out, and I use it on a regular basis now, all the time. I always say, this is on my bucket list, this is on my bucket list. So I owe it to that, so I'm still very glad I saw the movie. And one of the things I said when I was first coming up with my early editions of my personal bucket list was to travel somewhere for the sake of travel, not just to see somebody or to go to a concert, for the sake of a destination. And I'm thinking about it, and then, and not long after, ironically, I talked about a cruiser. I did go on a cruise because my friends were singing on it. I have several friends who are traditional jazz singers, that part of the traditional jazz circuit. I went on a cruise with them. It was just great spending time with them. Afterwards, my boss took me out to coffee. She asked me all about the cruise, and I start saying, my friend Becky did this, my friend Terry did this. And she's like, wait a minute, your friends were on the cruise? So she didn't even know. She thought I was taking a trip just for the sake of taking a cruise, not just to be with friends. And so that was a sign for me. It was time to take that trip. So I had two things in mind. I mentioned the Mississippi River. Another thing I thought of, I had also been fascinated about the London Bridge, because that, as I think everyone knows, was the original London Bridge is in Lake Havasu, Arizona. And to think of a bridge that was so prominent in history now it's so settled and laid back in the setting, I thought that was kind of far out too. But I just asked several people for a second opinion. Which one should I do? The London Bridge? And every single one of them said, Lake Itasca, the Mississippi headwaters, for sure. That's got to be an amazing thing. And it's odd that I would come up with this all on my own. I independently planned a trip out of nowhere that I've never heard anyone planning the likes of it before. And I wondered, was Lake Itasca going to be a desolate area? But no, I look it up online, and yes, they do make a big deal of it there, as they should. They have a park there. And I heard about a cruise that's run by a father and son on the lake. So naturally, I got my tickets for that. I talked my friend into going with me, and I tell my friend, I got my anxiety about my travel anxiety, so it's going to be a short trip. It wasn't even 72 hours in between the time we were at Austin Bergstrom, and so it worked out. it worked out beautifully. And when I got to that lake, I looked at that. I could not believe I was there. I was just in awe looking at the lake at first. And I was so thrilled when I got on that boat. I don't know, this is a little off, but when I got on that boat, I went to get concession. The son was running the concession stand. I just went to get a bottle of water, and he says, "How'd you like some popcorn?" I said, "Sure," and because I wasn't hungry. We were going to have lunch, but I'm like, how could I let this guy down? How could I not celebrate the moment? So I want to support him. So I threw my money at him. We stashed the popcorn in her purse and ate it later at the hotel. But at least it looked like it. And but then we're on the boat. It's a beautiful lake, and I'm thinking of how I envisioned that tiny little stream flowing out of the lake. Could it really be like that, or is it even different? Does it actually flow out of the lake? And when they say it's the source, is that just sort of a metaphorical thing, and it doesn't really actually flow out? I wasn't sure. And then when we get to this one part, granted it was a beautiful tour and all, but we get to this one part. He says the Mississippi headwaters are right over there. If you can look over, I look over, I don't see anything that really stands out, and I'm thinking maybe I misjudged this whole situation. I was a little worried. So we go out to lunch, but then we go. There is a place where you can park and walk up to the actual Mississippi headwaters. And my dreams, my childhood thrills within were totally fulfilled. It was everything I could imagine. It was like about to the other end of the stage. That's how long it was. A little line coming out of the lake, and the river, just a little creek flowing. They had set up some rocks along so you can walk on there, and I'm standing there, and I felt, well, the first thing to come to mind, even though it's kind of dull, is Leonardo DiCaprio going, "I'm king of the world." That's how I felt standing on those rocks. And it was just pure magic. What a thrill to see a tiny little stream flowing out. And it's just a little creek just flowing out of a river. It looks like a big nothing. And yet this is the beginning of the Mississippi River. And I'm like, I am standing on the top of the Mississippi River. What I envisioned was how the child within me would see that. Is a disproportionate view of me standing there with a map of the United States, and I'm standing up there waving at everyone, and you can see me, when you look at the United States. And man, it was everything I could have dreamed of, and I just was so thrilled that I actually brought myself there. And I come to think about how it's like it was mythology class that started how in my story it was the gods that made it happen, that guided the boy to find his father. And but by the way, it flows out at a northwest angle, and that's like kind of ironic because the Mississippi River flows anything but northwest, but it hooks around the lake, goes down. And I'm thinking that totally fit in with my story, the way, because the boy didn't know what he was doing. He started to dig the river. He thought he was going this way, and it turns out it's the other. And that too just totally amazed me. I came up with the idea of contacting Mr. P that night. I thought of it. I was telling my friend that, and he said, "We should do that." I look him up online, unfortunately, found out he had passed away like about a year before that. So what I did do is I sent a letter to his widow and snail mailed it and never heard from her either way. So I can only hope that she got it, and I can only hope that she knows it. And when I get to the airport and I actually see a friend of mine at the airport, my friend Maggie happens to be in Minneapolis as well for some kind of conference, and that's when I started. That was the first time I was able to rant about this story and just go on talking so much with such elation. She saw me like she'd never seen before, so I'm glad she was there. I'm feeling like, and I got to thinking, like with this mythology story with the gods guiding the child, maybe Mr. P was guiding me on this independent adventure in spite of my reservations, and maybe he put Maggie at the airport to be there so I could have someone to tell it with and begin my experience. And I'm thinking life can be like a myth, and maybe my myth actually was controlled the way the gods control the boy's story. And I found out something not too long ago. I always took for granted. I always thought the Mississippi was the longest river in the country. Does everyone think that? It's not. It's actually the Missouri, and I never knew that before. I mean, I knew it wasn't the longest in the world. I knew the Yangtze and the Amazon, the Nile. I knew they were all, but I always thought the Mississippi River was the longest in the country. But even though it's thinner and may hold less water because of that, the Missouri's about 200 miles longer. So you better believe it. One of these days, I'm heading over to Three Forks, Montana. I'm going to experience the headwaters of the Missouri. Thank you.
This is a story I have wanted to tell, and I have given it a name. I call this story Love's Anvil. In March of 2013, the call to destiny came with my breakup with a woman that I have loved and still love for 28 years. It was the most painful breakup I had ever been through. Yet I could not start grieving. I could not start the grieving process. I decided to call on Laura Rose, my friend of 3 years. She had lost her oldest son to suicide. And I knew, she knew, how to grieve. I told her of my dilemma. We sat on her couch. She turned to me, and she said, "Here's what we're going to do. We'll go to the coast near Corpus Christi, where I grew up. And we'll put my son's ashes into the Gulf of Mexico." We did. We went. As she dumped the ashes, her grief surfaced. So did mine. She wept and wailed, and I cried with her. When we got back to the car, I washed the sand off of her feet. She told me later, "That is when I fell in love with you." I was falling in love with her. On the way back to Austin, we fell deeper and deeper in love. By August, we had become lovers. In a most profound way. I knew what Laura Rose wanted. I knew what she had always wanted. She wanted for God to be with us, the two lovers, while we made love. I said a prayer and asked for the presence of God while we made love. With hope, but with no expectation, God showed up and got as close to us as biology would allow. That December, Laura Rose went to Santa Barbara to a family reunion with her sisters and other family members. While she was there, she became seriously ill with what she thought was food poisoning. After 3 days, she was well again and came back to Austin. Then, about February 22nd, she fell ill again, this time with 106 fever. I called her that morning and became alarmed. She could barely talk. I called again, and she did not answer. In a state of near panic, I left my store and went over to her house. Her youngest son was there, and he told me that she had been taken to the hospital. I went to the hospital. A nurse at the hospital told me that Laura Rose was in a coma. She was on a respirator, and she was wrapped in a blanket to bring her fever down. She said the blood analysis showed she had a serious infection, probably staph, probably MRSA. MRSA is often lethal, as many of you already know. I contacted my doctor, a doctor named Lane Sebring. He went to work on my behalf. He provided me with 25 pages of research compiled from NIH via PubMed on the efficacy of intravenous vitamin C. That, he said, the staph infection could kill her. It was shutting down her kidneys and her liver. The vitamin C, delivered intravenously, would detoxify the metabolites of staph and could and probably would save her. But here's what else he told me. He warned me, even if I were her attending physician, which I am not, the hospital would not allow such a treatment. In desperation, I reached out to another ally, a retired MD who knew what was happening at the hospital. We were cooking up a plan, which even included hijacking an ambulance. He said, even if we could unhook her from life support equipment, sneak her out of the room in a laundry cart without anyone noticing, where could we take her? Without life support, she would surely die, and we'd be charged with negligent homicide. I knew he was right. When I was outside the hospital with Ampy, she asked, how does it look? Meaning, what was I feeling? I answered very simply, it's all over with but the crying. By now, the family had come from all over Texas, and the sister from Santa Barbara was there at the hospital, as well as most of the dance community. So many people were there, the hospital had to make up new rules about how many visitors could be allowed on the floor, much less the room. At one point, the family members gathered in Laura Rose's room to hear the prognosis as I walked by in the hall, outside the room. They were being lied to by the appointed hospital staffer who said the antibiotics were working and not to give up hope. Laura Rose was going to die. And knowing that we had been so utterly connected in our union with each other in the presence of God, I did what I was directed to do. I invited her to be inside of her, inside of me. I prayed an out loud prayer that I spoke over and over. God, if it's okay with you, and if Laura Rose wants it, let her join me, take a ride away from this place. That I prayed over and over. A day later, the family decided to take her off of life support. The call came. Laura Rose died at 11:25 p.m., February 28th, in 2014. I woke up the next day and could not stop crying. I stumbled out onto my front yard trying to get to my car. I could see it, but somehow I could not walk over to it. Suddenly, I stopped crying. Through my voice, through my vocal cords, through me came the words, "It's okay, honey, just keep going." I was surprised, but not shocked. God had said yes, and Laura Rose said yes. She was inside me. I got to my car and drove to work. When I got there, I parked over by my greenhouse, away from everybody. I opened the door of my car and stepped out. I took a deep breath. Then I screamed. I screamed a powerful scream. In that scream, my chest blew open like iron bars off of a cage I did not know I was in. In that scream, everything I had ever known disappeared. There was no me, no sky, no land, no world, no earth. There was only the scream. All else ceased to exist. I finally ran out of air. the world slowly came back. I was standing on the ground beside my car, my greenhouse in front of me. All things were familiar to me, but not the same. 10 years and 4 months have gone by since the passing of Laura Rose. For 7 years I grieved. I grieved and washed clear and clean all of me by my laughter and my tears and more laughter from the past and echoing into the hereafter. I am the same, but not the same. Now I can hear of some act of kindness, no matter how small, between creatures, human or not. And it so fills me with joy that I cannot contain it. It starts as a chuckle. Then it turns into laughter or sobbing, then ends in gratitude. It has taken me 10 years to realize the immensity of this gift wrought by God and Laura Rose. I can only end this story with this. When asked about the ecstatic Rose Heart reunion, Laura Rose had this to say: "I'm glad for the renewal of contact. The same principle applies to the ecstatic Rose Heart reunion. It is a necessary link to our metaphysical foundation, the link, the passageway, the gate to all that came before, the development of consciousness that came at great cost, paid for with pain, loss, and the suffering of separation. All of this is the breath of God. Lost within it is the staggering vastness of joy untold, and only just now perceived. That comes with the union and reunion of ourselves. My many blessings go forth on this holy Easter event known as Ecstatic Rose Heart Reunion. May all be blessed. All my love, Laura Rose." In all my years of this life, this is what I have discovered. Love does not know time or distance. Love does what it wants. You're just along for the ride. Destiny is being played out, not at the whim of God, but at the surprise of God. All of these events have shaped me into who I have become and what I have come to call love's anvil. This is how I see, with gratitude, the breath of God. That's my story. Thank you for listening.
"12 days ago, my ex-husband, the father of my daughter Surya, died after a 2-year struggle with cancer. While I intended to tell a completely different story tonight, I'm needing to tell this story, to remember and honor who he was and the ways in which he made a lasting difference in my life. The summer before our marriage ended, he had journeyed to India for the last time. Although he had lived in India on more than one occasion, this visit was in many ways his goodbye to the land and culture that had given him his spiritual name. And while for many a name is just a name, in India there is the understanding that there is a great meaning in our names, because our name, when spoken, announces us and identifies our soul energy, and it carries significant weight. It was Sri H.W.L. Punja, known as Papaji, who gave my ex-husband his spirit name, Bhagaratha. When he asked Papaji what Bhagaratha meant, Papaji said, Bhagaratha was a legendary king in the Ramayana who gave up his riches to save his ancestors. As often happens with Indian gurus, they intuit the essence of a devotee's life, and they do that without knowing anything about their actual biography. In this case, my ex-husband had refused to accept his trust fund inheritance the decade before he met Papaji. Not one word about my ex-husband literally giving up his riches had ever been mentioned to Papaji. Once my ex-husband returned from India from that journey, he abbreviated Bhagaratha to Bhagarit. When comparing our childhood upbringings, Bhagarit and I were completely from opposite poles. Physically, he looked like the people I had grown up seeing only on TV. Actors with his blonde hair, blue eyes, and marathon runner stature were most often cast in the movies to represent the American dream. Demographically, Bhagarit was the 1% other in my South Texas orientation. His physical type was known where I came from as El Gringo. People who looked like him were more often the law, the landlord, or sadly, the oppressor. And often people with Bhagarit's physical appearance kept people that looked like me and my relatives as their hired help. The Spanish words Bhagarit understood, and he even spoke in a pinch, were learned at home with his family's Mexican-American live-in maid. Having attended private schools, studied abroad, and trained as a dancer at Tisch in New York City, Bhagarit had been raised with privilege and means. Thankfully, Bhagarit defied all those stereotypes, thankfully from the start, choosing to walk away from his family's wealth as a young man. When he was called to India the first time, Bhagarit's commitment to spiritual development was what I fell in love with. But having struggled all my young life with poverty, I wanted to understand why someone with an inheritance could refuse abundance. Why not make good with what you were given, I asked him on one of our first dates. Isn't it possible to have both self-realization and the means to serve others? What he said to me was, I did not want their blood money. Now, literally I had to ask, like, you mean like real blood money? You know, because sadly, some of you that know my story, and if you've been here in the last 12 years, I probably have visited that story more than once, or if you've read the memoir, my father was murdered. And there was blood money involved because of drug situations in South Texas. But thankfully, Bhagarit clarified. He said, no, bloodline money. meaning that riches, as far as he was concerned, always had been acquired at the expense of somebody else's tireless labor. And because Bagheera believed in karma, the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence decided their fate in future existences. A couple of years later, after he and I committed to each other as partners, Bagheera and I received a call saying that his father had been shot in the premeditated murder-suicide by his mother. To everyone who knew Bagheera's mother, she was, oh my God, a beautiful woman in her 50s, and that's why she had just gone into kind of the menopause age and was having very extreme emotions when she shot her estranged husband. She was a former New York debutante, gifted fine artist, and a world traveler. She loved hunting as sport. So when the tragedy made the front page the following morning in their Stanford community in Palo Alto, California, they were in disbelief. Why had she pulled the trigger? Apparently, Bagheera's father, a handsome Texas oil family heir who had become a successful California real estate developer, had been having a secret affair for 10 years with a woman who had just written Bagheera's mother a letter telling her of that affair, after Bagheera's father had just ended that relationship. Overwhelmed by the shock and grief of that betrayal, Bagheera's mother invited her ex-husband to come over to pick up some legal documents they needed to complete the divorce. When Bagheera's father showed up, as expected, he was shot the moment his mother opened the front door. His father apparently eventually recovered from his wounds when a neighbor saw him collapse on the street after running for his life after the assault. His mom, however, after shooting her ex-husband, then turned the gun on herself, dying instantly on impact. Soon after, I joined Bagheera and his siblings at their mother's home in Palo Alto to help vacate the property of all her belongings. Shockingly, his mother's blood had since dried on the floor like a dark paste. And when the siblings ready to call a cleanup crew to remove it, Bagheera stepped in and said, No, wait, please. Don't call a cleaning crew. I want to clean up Mom's remains. And he said this very thoughtfully. His decision was literally to turn the cleaning and the purification of the space with his own hands into a ritual. He wanted to take responsibility for helping to purify the suffering that has caused his mother's shedding of blood. Having witnessed several Hindu funeral customs and death rites while training as a yogi and living in India, Bagheera had witnessed how it provides comfort and solace to the bereaved to honor the memory of the departed loved one with ritual. Essential sacraments practiced when a family member passes stem from deep-rooted spiritual beliefs in karma, dharma, and the cycle of life and birth, which helps to guide the soul on its journey to the next phase of existence, of course, with the help of all of these observances. When I witnessed his steadfast commitment to ritual, I knew right then that I would marry this man, and that he and I also did have karma and dharma together to explore as a couple with the hope of acquiring more self-awareness together. The following year we got married and we conceived our daughter, Surya. And on the very week of our union, the marriage, well, like all of us, how many of you are married here? You know what I speak of. The marriage is the true test, yes? It's not always a blissful experience, right? It's a lot of work. And we got to work pretty quickly on some very intense, extraordinary things. And we brought very intense, of course, family of origin trauma issues, which I just hinted at, right? So that alone turned and required a lot of spiritual practice together to endure the 7 years that we did stay together. And when our marriage did end, we faithfully continued to co-raise our daughter and eventually welcomed his wife, who completed 2 decades with him, literally till his death 12 days ago. And we embraced her into our extended family. We all agreed and recognized that when 2 people conceive a child together, they're not independent of the other, especially when a step-parent joins the effort as well, because it requires conscious codependency in the good sense to maneuver skillfully and respectfully together. I too loved his wife and love her still, because she was literally there till the last moment. And once he knew that his cancer had returned, probably about a year ago, he chose the right to death. You know, it's not a legal thing in Texas per se, but he didn't want any kind of anything, which meant living at home, dying at home, day in and day out. And who was there by his side but this beautiful woman, his wife, that we brought into all of our lives together. 12 days ago, my daughter and her stepmom were both present when Bagheera took his last breath. And it was now our 25-year-old daughter who whispered tenderly into his father's ear as he struggled to breathe, "It's okay to go, Dad. It's okay." Meaning, no need to struggle or suffer on our behalf anymore, Dad. Just, you can go. Amazingly, in the next minute or so after my daughter told him that, he took his last breath. As I listened to my daughter retell this exchange, it occurred to me that maybe all of our lives are not measured by the number of breaths that we take, but actually our lives are measured more by the moments that take our breath away. Seeing my daughter mature as the compassionate and wise young woman she has now become took my breath away. And for that, I remain ever grateful to have been there witnessing, even from afar, the best outcome of that marriage in her being here and now with me. And in the same way, when I look at you and I share this story, I thank each of you for the same reason, for being so present to listen tonight to the not so independent stories. Thank you so much for sharing, storytellers, so generously from your hearts. And thank you, Ryan, for the beautiful music to highlight the heartfelt stories tonight. And of course, I thank the volunteers, Pauline, bless you, George, Trevor, who's in the back running the sound and making sure that we can be heard, and he's actually photographing this so that the storytellers have their stories that they can continue to share as they like past tonight. So thank you all, and tonight as we were...
What about me?
Oh my God! Would this be even possible without Annie Laganga? She's so precious. She was a sacrificial lamb tonight because technically, for those of you that have been here before, she kind of sets the tone because, you know, she used to be, not used to be, you're still a stand-up comic in my book, but, you know, she actually made some, okay, little piggy bank money, right, being a stand-up comic at one point. But I love surrendering things to her because she just knows to be here now, too, for better or worse, right? And she always starts with a little story, but tonight she forgot that she was telling a story. And she was so funny because she was giving me a hard time in the rehearsal because I kept forgetting things myself. And then she forgot that she had this little story to tell, too. But she promises me she's going to tell it sometime soon. Yes. But she felt that it was correct. I think that's why I trust you so much, that it was time to move on. It's not about our individual story ever. It's like you knew we needed to get to the bigger offering. So thank you, Annie Laganga. And the other thing, before we do our goodbye ritual, because we return to our perfect stranger, I want to because I thought Ryan sings as well, but tonight he felt a little shy till now. And it happened while he was listening to the stories. So tell us the story you're going to sing, because this is one of his own creations. And we're going to let this be the climactic part of the storytelling. And then if you could wait a few moments so that we complete with our silent ritual, I would be so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambi. This song, I wrote it about 8 years ago. It's called Love is a Friend. And your story actually reminded me of it too, because of the way that even when you were separated from your husband, it seems like there was a lot of love there that produced such a beautiful maturity and care in your daughter. And it's just, this song is that no matter what troubles we have and difficulties, there's always things with love. It can feel like it's the enemy sometimes, but it's always the friend. The love itself is always the friend, even though there are problems that can feel like the enemy. Ever since the first day that I met you, I feel all this love here in my heart, babe. And to think when we were beginning, I was afraid to start. Now the moons and the seasons are passing, and our love is going strong. Blessed fire that burns in our heart, helping us get along, 'cause love is a friend. Yes, she is. Yes, she is. Don't treat her like an enemy. I said love is a friend. Yes, she is. Yes, she is. Don't treat her like an enemy. Enemy, love is. I sit here and I gaze across the water. My thoughts, they go skipping like some stones. I've been wondering and pondering about love. And old skeletons and bones. And I'm damned if I give in to self-loathing. I know I choose now to hold my head up high. Yes, I'm done with all the moaning and the groaning. Let's lift our voices high, 'cause love is a friend. So don't treat her like an enemy. I said love is a friend. So why is it hard to treat her like a friend? Don't treat her like an enemy. Enemy love is. Thank you all.
Thank you. So now to end the evening, look around to see if your perfect stranger is still here. And they may have had to leave because some people have to leave early. But if they're there, and this is going to be a test of will, we'll call it that, where you're going to be like a little mouse. Even though the ones that I've run into are not quiet, you're quieter. You're going to find your way to that person, and you're just going to stand quietly in front of them for a few moments. No words. No words. You're just going to stand and communicate without saying a word, and just being grateful that you had the perfect stranger to share a heart with tonight. We're thanking each other for bringing a quality of presence and open-heartedness. We will see you again next month, first Saturday. Thank you for being here. Much love.